Alexander Brooks, a black man in his 40s, dressed casually but exuding confidence, walked into the international airport. He wore an old brown hat, a white shirt, and jeans, carrying a small suitcase. Inside the suitcase were important documents. As he was preparing to attend an international aviation summit where he would announce the groundbreaking plan for the airline he owned. As he approached the security checkpoint, Alexander stood in the long line of passengers, waiting patiently. The crowd around him, a mix of different races and social classes, paid him no attention, and he had no expectations of being noticed. For Alexander, maintaining a humble and approachable attitude was always a core principle of life. However, when it was his turn, Jason, a middle-aged security officer with a frown on his face, seemed irritated from the first glance. He scanned Alexander from head to toe, furrowing his brow as if noticing something unusual. "Hey, hold on a second," Jason said, his tone cold and unfriendly. Alexander politely handed over his ticket and ID, but Jason didn't bother to look at them, continuing to stare at him with a scrutinizing gaze. "Are you sure this is your ticket? You don't look like the type of person who could afford one like this." Alexander was taken aback by the comment, but he remained calm. "This is my ticket. I purchased it online, and I have all the proper documentation." Jason shook his head, sneering. "Just wait here. I need to double-check." Jason continued to detain Alexander at the checkpoint, demanding that he open his suitcase for a personal search. This action was not only unusual but also insulting, as the other passengers before him had been processed quickly. A few passengers nearby began to notice the situation. "I don't see any reason to hold me up like this," Alexander said, his voice still calm but with a firmer edge. Jason smirked. "Who do you think you are, talking like that? This is the procedure, and if you don't like it, don't fly." Alexander's luggage was rummaged through. Jason deliberately slowed down the inspection process, even taking out individual items and making rude comments. "This shirt looks cheap. Not something someone flying business class should wear." Alexander didn't respond to the provocations. He knew reacting would only make things worse. But inside, he felt hurt, not just because of the disrespect, but because Jason represented a system that he had worked hard to build, hoping to create a welcoming and fair environment for all passengers. Some passengers started to whisper. A woman standing nearby turned to Jason and spoke up. "Excuse me, is this really necessary? I don't think he's done anything wrong." Jason turned to the woman, his voice full of annoyance. "Do you want to be held up with him? If not, keep moving." Alexander took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'll remember this," he said softly, his icy gaze causing Jason to hesitate for a moment. But Jason quickly regained his arrogant expression, thinking he had won. The ordeal lasted over an hour, and by the time everything ended, the flight Alexander needed to catch had already taken off. Jason showed no remorse, even shrugging with an air of indifference. "Looks like you weren't quick enough to catch your flight." Alexander looked at the flight information board and saw that the flight had left. This was an extremely important flight, not just for him but also for his company. The summit he was attending was where he was scheduled to present a sustainable development plan for the aviation industry, a project he had devoted years to. He turned back to look at Jason one more time. "Thanks for the lesson today. We'll meet again." Jason smirked, thinking that the man was just an ordinary passenger with no power to do anything to him. Alexander walked out of the airport, frustration and disappointment swelling inside him. But he knew that this was not the time to get angry. He called his assistant team, instructing them to arrange a private flight as soon as possible. At the headquarters of the airline, a modern building located in the heart of the city, Alexander entered with a stern expression. Employees, from security staff to senior managers, greeted him respectfully. No one could have imagined that the man who had just been humiliated at the airport was the CEO of the largest airline in the region. Alexander entered the meeting room, where the senior management team was waiting for him. He recounted the details of the incident at the airport, his voice clear but filled with underlying meaning. "We have always prided ourselves on the diversity and equality in our services," Alexander said. "But what I experienced today shows that we still have a long way to go." The management team was stunned as they listened to the story. They couldn't believe that a security staff member at the airport dared to behave like that, especially toward the founder of the airline. "We will investigate immediately," one of the directors pledged. "I will personally handle this matter." Alexander nodded, but his eyes were filled with determination. "I don't want just an investigation. This is an opportunity for us to change things at the root. I want a comprehensive retraining system, and I want to know who in our team has a discriminatory attitude. Remember, the image of the airline isn't just in the planes we fly, but also in how we treat every single passenger." The management board agreed with his plan. A large-scale internal investigation was launched, and the story began to attract significant public attention when the video of the incident at the airport was shared widely on social media. Jason was still unaware that his actions had been recorded and were causing an uproar on social media. He continued working as a security guard at the airport with an air of self-satisfaction and arrogance. For Jason, detaining Alexander wasn't just about asserting personal power. It was also a way for him to feel important in his workplace. Meanwhile, the video of the incident spread rapidly. A passenger had recorded the entire scene of Jason humiliating Alexander, and the clip quickly garnered millions of views. Netizens were outraged not only by Jason's racist attitude, but also by the unjust treatment of a passenger right at the airport. Public opinion began to question the airline's policies and how they managed their staff. Hashtags like #FairnessInAirlines, #EndRacismNow started trending across social media platforms. Some human rights activists also spoke out, demanding the airline take specific actions to address the issue. At the airport, Jason began to feel the pressure. His colleagues became distant, avoiding discussing the viral video, but their looks were filled with unease. One morning, as Jason was preparing for his shift, the head of security summoned him to an emergency meeting. In the meeting room, Jason faced a group of senior management. On the screen in front of him was the video recording of the incident, clearly showing every action and word he directed at Alexander. Jason felt his face flush as he realized everything he had done was now exposed. "Jason," the head of security spoke, his voice stern. "Do you know who it was you insulted?" Jason shook his head, trying to remain calm. "Just a regular passenger. I was just following protocol." Another manager looked at him with disappointment. "You just insulted Mr. Alexander Brooks, the owner of this airline." Jason froze, his ears rang, and cold sweat trickled down his forehead. He couldn't believe the man he had belittled was the head of the company. "We've launched an internal investigation," the head of security continued. "Your actions not only violated the company's code of conduct, but also severely damaged the airline's reputation." Jason tried to defend himself. "I didn't know who he was. If I had known, I wouldn't have." "The issue isn't who he is," a director interrupted, his voice cold. "You have no right to treat any passenger like that, no matter who they are." Jason was immediately suspended from his position. He left the meeting room with a sense of loss, fearful for his future. But this was just the beginning of the consequences he would have to face. Jason returned home in a daze. He locked the door and sat staring blankly at the computer screen, where the video was being widely shared. The comment section beneath the video was filled with harsh criticism and outrage. Some people recognized him and left biting remarks, making Jason feel as though the whole world had turned its back on him. Meanwhile, Alexander decided to maintain a public and transparent stance on the matter. He attended a press conference to share his thoughts. In front of a large crowd of reporters, Alexander said, "What I went through is not an isolated incident. It is the result of deep-rooted prejudices that many people face every day. I'm not asking for special attention because I'm the owner of this airline. I just want everyone to be treated fairly, regardless of their race, class, or social status. Alexander's words quickly became the focal point in the media. He not only received strong support from the public but also from international human rights organizations. His airline also announced that it would undergo a comprehensive overhaul, including employee retraining and the implementation of stricter policies to prevent discrimination. The public outrage not only focused on Jason but also extended to the airline. Many people began to boycott the airline services, demanding concrete actions to make amends for the mistake. Alexander held a meeting with the entire executive team. The atmosphere in the meeting room was tense. Some directors were worried about the negative impact of the incident on the company's revenue and reputation. "I don't care about short-term revenue," Alexander said, his voice firm. "What matters to me is that we do the right thing. If we don't change now, everything I've built will be meaningless." An action plan was put in place. First, Jason would be held legally accountable if the investigation found he had violated human rights. Second, all employees would be required to participate in mandatory diversity and respect training. Third, an anonymous reporting system would be implemented, allowing passengers and staff to report any discriminatory behavior they witnessed. As the airline began to implement the plan, Jason faced immense pressure from public opinion. He was condemned by the public, shunned by friends, and even his family expressed disappointment. Jason began to realize that his actions had not only affected others but were also destroying his own life. After his first press conference, Alexander received strong support from the public. However, he understood that appearing in the media wasn't just about speaking but also about taking action. He decided to launch a larger media campaign, aimed not only at addressing the incident that had occurred but also at sparking a global dialogue on equality and human rights in the aviation industry. Alexander planned to appear on a popular television show to share more about the incident and how he was handling it. On set, the host asked him, "Mr. Brooks, how do you feel about being insulted by a member of your own staff?" Alexander maintained a calm demeanor and responded, "I'm not angry for myself. I'm angry because this reflects that many other people are enduring this injustice every day, but they don't have the chance to speak out. I am fortunate because I have the power and platform to make a change. So, what I feel now is not anger, but responsibility." Alexander's response quickly spread across social media and was praised as a symbol of tolerance and responsible leadership. He continued to use his influence to drive a movement for positive change, not only within his airline but also across the service industry. During the investigation, the airline discovered that Jason wasn't the only employee with discriminatory attitudes. Some of his colleagues were also accused of similar behavior, although not as overt or severe as Jason's actions. This revelation strengthened Alexander's resolve to change the system from the ground up. Alexander decided to meet with Jason directly, not to accuse or insult him, but to better understand the deeper reasons behind his behavior. In a small meeting room, Jason was brought in, clearly exhausted and tense. "Do you know why I wanted to meet with you?" Alexander asked, his tone calm. Jason lowered his head, not responding. "I'm not here to criticize you. I want to understand. Why did you do that? Why did you think you had the right to treat others that way?" Jason hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice trembling. I grew up in a family where people always said that black people were inferior, untrustworthy. I didn't know that was wrong until now." Alexander looked at Jason, his gaze thoughtful. "You know, prejudice is not your fault when you grow up in such an environment. But acting on that prejudice is your responsibility." Jason remained silent. He felt as if he were confronting his own guilt and had no more excuses to offer. After the meeting, Jason was required to participate in a mandatory educational program on equality and human rights. This was part of the airline's new policy, not only for Jason but also for all employees. In the first class, Jason met people from various cultures and races. One of the speakers, Sarah, a black woman who had faced discrimination in her job, shared her story. Her words made Jason realize that his prejudice was not just an isolated act, but part of a larger system of injustice. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, I would be treated fairly, Sarah said. But I was wrong. Injustice isn't just in direct words, but in the glances, the small actions that others never notice. Jason listened quietly. For the first time in his life, he felt a deep sense of regret. He began to wonder if there was any way to make amends for his mistakes, not just with Alexander but with others he had hurt along the way. The airline announced a series of strong reform measures. One of the largest initiatives was the establishment of a dedicated team focused on equality and diversity, ensuring that all employees were trained and that passengers were treated fairly. Alexander personally led this project, taking the time to meet with staff, listen to their feedback, and implement specific solutions. At the same time, public opinion gradually shifted from anger to hope. They saw tangible actions from the airline and began to support Alexander in his reform efforts. Major partners in the aviation industry also reached out to him, eager to learn from how he managed the crisis and rebuilt trust. As for Jason, he decided to participate in community activities, volunteering with nonprofit organizations to support those facing discrimination. He not only wanted to atone for his past actions but also wanted to change himself. Jason wrote a long letter to Alexander, expressing his regret and thanking him for not treating him the way he had treated Alexander. Alexander read the letter and smiled. He didn't respond immediately, but deep down, he knew he had done the right thing. Forgiveness not only helped others change but also helped him find peace within himself. The training sessions and community activities gradually brought about change in Jason. He began to understand that the biases he carried not only hurt others but also held himself back. He recalled growing up in a neighborhood where people often blamed Black individuals for all the hardships. The words of his parents, friends, and environment had deeply ingrained in his mind, making it difficult for him to see fairness. One day, during a training session, Jason listened to a story from a man named Marcus, who was also Black and had been a victim of workplace discrimination. Marcus shared how his colleagues had distanced themselves from him and how he was overlooked for promotions despite his outstanding abilities. "But I didn't give up," Marcus said, his eyes full of determination. "I didn't let the prejudice of others define who I am. I proved that my worth is not based on the color of my skin but on my actions." Marcus's story made Jason reflect deeply. He realized that change didn't just come from correcting his behavior, but also from learning how to support and stand with those who are treated unfairly. Jason began participating in group discussions, where he openly shared his thoughts and feelings. He admitted his mistakes and expressed his desire to make amends. For the first time in his life, Jason felt that he was truly being listened to and understood. Meanwhile, Alexander continued to lead the reforms at the airline. The mandatory training programs for all employees went beyond theory, focusing on practical scenarios that put them in simulated situations to better understand the feelings of those who are discriminated against. Another initiative implemented was Diversity Day, an annual event at the airport where employees and passengers from different cultures come together to share stories, food, and traditions. Alexander believed that creating a space for people to connect would break down the barriers of prejudice. Although still suspended from his job, Jason was invited to attend Diversity Day as part of his journey to make amends. Initially, he felt out of place, but as he listened to the inspiring stories from speakers and passengers, he began to feel a sense of hope. At the event, Jason met Marcus, the person whose story he had heard during the training session. Marcus recognized Jason and approached him. "I know you're trying to change," Marcus said, offering a warm smile. "It's not easy, but it's worth it." Marcus's words moved Jason. It was the first time he felt forgiveness from someone who had been the target of the prejudice he once carried. After months of participating in educational programs and community activities, Jason decided to take a bold step, publicly apologizing to Alexander and the entire Black community. He knew that confronting his mistakes in public would be difficult. But he also understood that this was the only way for him to make amends. A press conference was held at the airport, attended by journalists, airline staff, and some human rights activists. Jason stood at the podium, his gaze tense but resolute. "I'm here today not to justify my actions," Jason began, his voice trembling. "I was wrong. What I did not only hurt Mr. Alexander Brooks, but it also harmed the values we should all stand for. I apologize for my words, actions, and misguided mindset." Jason lowered his head, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. But when he lifted his head, he saw Alexander standing up from the front row. Alexander walked up to the podium and placed his hand on Jason's shoulder. "I accept your apology," Alexander said, his tone calm. "But forgiveness is not the end. It's the beginning. Show that you've truly changed, not just through words but through actions." The room fell silent for a few seconds. Then applause broke out. It was not just support for Jason, but also recognition for Alexander and the values he was building. Jason returned to work, but this time no longer as a security guard. Instead, he was assigned a new role within the airline's corporate culture development team. His task was to assist with training programs, sharing his story to help others recognize and overcome prejudice. Meanwhile, Alexander's airline received praise from international organizations for its strong reforms. Revenue growth returned, and customer trust was restored. But for Alexander, what mattered most was that these changes had created an environment where everyone was respected and treated equally. Jason continued his efforts to make amends. He participated in community events, helping young people face societal prejudice. Each time he shared his story, he not only received forgiveness but also felt that he was doing the right thing. Alexander, watching from a distance, felt content. He knew that not everyone could change. But Jason's transformation was a testament to the fact that tolerance and forgiveness could create miracles. At the end of the chapter, Jason attended a meeting with Alexander and senior staff. He was no longer a man full of prejudice and arrogance. He was now a man with an open heart and an unwavering determination to do what was right. Alexander continued to lead the airline's reform initiatives. He didn't stop at just training employees. He also focused on building a comprehensive model for the global aviation industry to learn from. Alexander organized an international conference on equality and diversity in the service industry, where major airlines from around the world participated. At the conference, Alexander shared his own story, not avoiding the incident at the airport. He emphasized that instead of hiding mistakes, businesses need to be brave enough to face them and learn from them. A business is truly strong when it knows how to rise from failure and act for a greater purpose. Alexander said, "We are not perfect, but we are continually striving to get better every day." The conference not only created a positive wave in the aviation industry but also inspired other service industries. Stories of change and empathy were shared widely, motivating many organizations to implement more progressive policies. Jason, who had made great strides in his journey of atonement, was invited to the conference to share his story. This was his first time speaking in front of an international audience. With a sincere voice, he recounted his journey from a prejudiced security guard to someone who now listens, changes, and seeks to make amends. "I used to think that treating others unfairly wouldn't have any significant consequences," Jason said. "But I was wrong. I've realized that every action, every word, can deeply impact someone's life. I've learned that lesson, and I will never forget it." Jason's speech received praise from the audience. To many, he was a living example that change is possible, as long as there is guidance and opportunity. With the success of the conference, Alexander decided to expand his influence by founding a nonprofit organization called the Field of Peace. The organization's goal was to promote inclusion and eliminate prejudice in diverse communities. It provided educational programs, workshops, and grants for constructive initiatives in society. Jason joined this organization as an ambassador, regularly appearing at events to share his story. He visited many schools, businesses, and communities to talk about the importance of compassion and understanding. Gradually, Jason no longer saw himself just as someone seeking redemption, but as a source of inspiration for change. Meanwhile, at the airline, employees noticed a significant change in the workplace culture. People became more open and friendly, no longer casting suspicious glances or showing discriminatory attitudes like before. The new policies implemented by Alexander created a healthy work environment where every employee felt respected and valued. After many years of effort, Alexander's airline not only restored its reputation but also became one of the world's leading airlines in terms of service quality and corporate culture. International organizations awarded the airline numerous accolades, recognizing its contribution to promoting equality and diversity. One of the most memorable moments came when Alexander was invited to attend an International Human Rights Award ceremony. On stage, he didn't talk about his own success, but instead focused on emphasizing that this success was the result of unity and the people who had made positive changes. "I couldn't have done this alone," Alexander said. "I want to thank all those who believed in my vision and courageously faced change. People like Jason, my employees, and even our customers who have patiently supported us throughout this journey." Jason sat in the audience, listening to those words with deep emotion. He was no longer the person he once was, and he knew that his mistakes had become part of a larger story, one about forgiveness, learning, and hope. Several years after the incident at the airport, Alexander sat in his office, gazing at the sky through the large glass window. His journey had taken him further than he had ever imagined. From a black boy growing up in poverty and facing prejudice, he had become a global symbol of compassion and responsible leadership. Jason, now the director of a branch of the Fields of Peace organization, entered the office to meet Alexander. They looked at each other, without needing to say anything, both understanding that they had traveled a difficult but meaningful journey together. "Thank you, Alexander," Jason said. "Without you, I don't know if I would have been able to change." Alexander smiled. "I was just the one who gave the opportunity. You decided to change." The story ends with the image of Alexander and Jason looking out the window, where an airplane with the airline's logo ascends into the sky. It was not only a symbol of success but also a symbol of hope and unity.